The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selena Mackenzie.
Now, when recently widowed Jason Corbett hired a young American to care for his two young children, there was nothing to suggest that her obsession with his children would end in his death. Well, Brian Carroll is an Irish journalist and documentary filmmaker, and he's covered the case Tom and Molly Martens extensively and is here to tell us more. Great to have you on the show with us, Brian.
Good afternoon, Selena. Nice to be here.
I must admit, I've watched the Netflix documentary, A Deadly Marriage, and I still can't make up my mind up whether I think she's guilty or innocent. It's one of those, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, I pitched and co-produced the Netflix documentary and worked on it for 4 years, and it's part of the reason why I wrote the book is because there is still huge questions surrounding whether justice was actually served here. And I think the book kind of breaks new ground and goes further than the Netflix documentary in that it's probably more investigative. And I got my hands on 10,000 pages of new documentation relating to the case. And I've used that to kind of underpin my examination of what actually happened here. And I think there's still, even if you go back to the very beginning and what happened on August 2nd, 2015, there's still huge question marks over were Tom and Molly Martens guilty of murder. They were originally convicted of second-degree murder in 2017, but won their case on appeal and subsequently entered into a plea agreement where they pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. But for Jason's family, for the detectives involved in the case, there remains a huge sense of dissatisfaction about whether actually justice was reached here.
Yeah, it was very much back and forward, wasn't it, with the various trials. First, they were found guilty, then there was an appeal and they got off, then they were back in prison again. It was all very confusing.
Yeah, I suppose if you want to take it back to the night itself and what actually happened, the confusion almost begins from the first instant, because at 3:02 a.m. on August 2nd, 2015, Tom Martens, who was a former FBI agent and father-in-law of Jason Corbett, the victim, he calls 911 and he says that Jason was choking his daughter, Molly Martens. That Tom intervened, hit him with a baseball bat, and, quote, "I may have killed him." So when the emergency services arrived 8 minutes later, they found that the body was cold, that the blood was congealed, and the scene was so horrific. There were several walls covered with blood, such that one of the emergency responders turned to Molly and asked her, "Where's the gun?" He thought Jason had actually been shot. So ever since that night, there's been question marks over how long the Martens delayed in calling 911, and question marks over whether, in fact, Jason was actually attacking Molly that night and whether the Martens acted in self-defense. Because when they were taken to the police station hours after the killing, neither Tom nor Molly were arrested or cautioned. They were interviewed voluntarily. And almost the first thing out of Tom Marten's mouth in his police interview is his claim that Jason's first wife had died mysteriously. He said that the coroner's finding was that she died as a result of an asthma attack, but Tom's view was that she had died of asphyxiation.
And didn't he also say that the woman's father had also said that when apparently he denied it?
Yeah, later on, after I think it's one of the interesting aspects of this case is how the Martens used the media and used social media in particular to put across their case. Because during their 2017 trial on second-degree murder charges, there wasn't a single line of evidence about domestic violence. It didn't feature in the trial at all. Yet 2 days after their conviction, they were featured on an ABC, the US network, featured on an ABC documentary about the case. And in that, Tom and Molly had given pre-recorded interviews in which Tom stated that Jason's first wife's father, a guy called Mike Fitzpatrick, had told Tom on the day of Jason and Molly's wedding that he had suspicions that Jason may have killed his daughter. Now, there were a couple of problems with that because, first of all, this guy, Mike Fitzpatrick, Jason's first wife's father, was not actually there at the wedding, so he couldn't have said that to Tom. And secondly, the detectives were immediately suspicious. I mean, whether you're an FBI agent or not, if your daughter is marrying somebody and their former father-in-law says to you, you know, I think he might have killed my daughter. You think that's something that you might raise on the day or at least subsequently. And especially if you're an FBI agent who has a top-level security clearance. Yet Tom strangely seems to have done nothing about this very hot information for about 4 years until he found himself in a police station in Davidson County facing allegations of murder.
Yeah. And as you say, it doesn't look good because the body was cold. So did they delay in calling? Plus there was blood everywhere. It looked like he'd been hit many times, not just the once, because obviously you do have the right to defend yourself in North Carolina. But the other thing that happened is the two young children were in the house, Jack and Sarah, and they sort of claimed that their father was abusive to Molly.
Yeah, Jack and Sarah were aged 10 and 8 at the time, and they become absolutely central to this story because they were sleeping upstairs in an upstairs bedroom, and the crime occurred in a master bedroom on the ground floor. After the killing, Tom and Molly were taken to the police station. About 3 hours later, they returned and they were handed the children and given custody of them. And they were made to remain in the custody of their father's killers for 15 days while an international custody dispute unfolded between Jason's sister, Tracy Lynch, and Molly Marten's. Tracy had been named in Jason's will as his preferred guardian for Jack and Sarah, but Molly wanted a US court to override the will and give her custody of Jack and Sarah because she had been their de facto mother for 7 years, ever since coming to Ireland to join the family as an au pair to the children. So during those 15 days, Jack and Sarah made allegations in 4 separate interviews with social workers in which they claimed that Jason was a domestic abuser, that he, quote, hit, punched and shoved Molly. But once the children were returned to Ireland and guardianship was awarded to Jason's sister, Tracy Lynch, the children retracted those allegations and they claimed that they were coached and threatened into making the allegations by Molly Marten's. But as the case went on, it took 2 years for the case to actually come to trial. The Martens were convicted of murder, sentenced to 20 to 25 years, and that appeared to be the end of the story. But the Martens then appealed the case, and they were subsequently released on appeal in 2021, with the court ruling that Jack and Sarah's allegations against her father should have been put to the original trial jury. So you had these 2 young kids who were 10 and 8 at the time of the killing. They're ordinary kids who find themselves in this extraordinary situation where they are the reason that their father's killers are released from prison. So it was at that point in the story that I became involved in working with Jack and Sarah because the Lynches were adamant that Molly and Tom were guilty. And Jack and Sarah in particular were adamant that they wanted to give evidence in court this time when the Martens came up for retrial. But unfortunately for Jack and Sarah and Jason's family, the district attorney in North Carolina decided that he was not going to proceed with a retrial, and instead he was going to enter into a plea deal with the Martens, which would see them plead guilty to the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. And in the end, they escaped with just another 7 months in prison.
Mm-hmm. I know that they sound very guilty from what you've said, but there were a few things, weren't there? Like the grandmother gave the children a code word, and they gave her a phone number in case she ever needed them, because apparently they were worried that he was abusive. And also, didn't Molly Martens, on the advice of an attorney friend, record some of their conversations? And it sounded like he was quite controlling.
Yeah, well, let's take the Russian dolls first. Sharon is Tom Martin's wife, and she was asleep in the basement of the house that night. And she claimed that she heard Tom wake up, grab the baseball bat, and go upstairs after hearing Molly screaming and hearing thumping sounds upstairs. But Sharon said in her statement a few hours after the killing that she had fallen back to sleep. Now, this seemed immediately suspicious to detectives, because what grandmother, what mother, what wife would do that when their daughter, husband and grandchildren are upstairs supposedly in this fight for their lives? But one of the interesting things Sharon said at the end of her interview was that Molly had always told her that Jason was abusive, but not physically abusive. And Sharon says in her statement that she would have been hysterical if she thought that Molly was in any way being physically abused. But Sharon said that the children told her that Jason pushed Molly, that he hit her. And Molly then denied this to her mother. She said, no, the children are just exaggerating. Every couple fights, Mom, except you and Dad. So Sharon said that because she was so concerned about what the kids had said and about her own suspicions that maybe Jason was a domestic abuser, she set up this emergency code word system with the children. So what she did, she said that she had them write her phone number underneath a Russian doll, which was on a bedside locker in the guest bedroom, and that she and the children practiced the children calling this number if there was ever an emergency. And she gave each of the children a code word. So Sarah's code word was Peacock, and Jack's was Galaxy. So Sharon directed the detectives on the night where they would find this Russian doll. And yes, indeed, they found the doll where she directed them to. But when they looked at the number written underneath the doll, they all felt that this was not a child's handwriting, that it had been written there by an adult. And remember, Sharon had told him that, she had got the kids to write her number there. Mm. So that was Sharon's role, the fact that she fell asleep, the fact that she'd set up this code word system, were all raising suspicions with detectives. And there was one further aspect to Sharon's story which is quite intriguing. The forensic officers in the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory, they tested the bloodied brick which Molly had used to hit Jason, and they found 25 hairs on the brick. 24 of the hairs were Jason's, but there was one mystery hair on the brick which bore, quote, genetic similarities to Molly, but was not Tom's hair. So the only other person in the house with genetic similarities to Molly was Sharon. So this again was another red flag for detectives about what role Sharon did or didn't play in the killing on that night. Mm. The other aspect that you mentioned there about secret recordings in the house also involved code words. Molly had been confiding in at least 5 of her neighbours, all female confidants, that Jason was a domestic abuser, but she wouldn't leave Jason because he wouldn't let her adopt the kids, and if she left, she'd have no rights to them, and he would bring them back to Ireland and she would never see them again. So one of the neighbours that Molly went to was a woman called Melissa Sams, and she is a family lawyer specialising in particularly contentious child custody disputes. So Molly goes to her and tells her that Jason is abusing her, but she won't leave because she'll lose all rights to the kids. So she asks for advice. And Melissa Sams tells her that she has very limited rights, but there is one avenue open to her, and that is to seek an emergency custody order where she can prove that Jason is abusive and or that he's abusing alcohol or drugs, for example. So what she needs to show in this emergency custody order is that the living environment is not safe for the kids with Jason and that they're better off with her. And Sam's advised her that in certain circumstances, judges will grant custody to a mother like Molly, even though she is not the birth mother and even though she has not adopted the children. So Sam's advised her to set up secret recording devices around the house, because when it came to court, being able to play in open court these recordings would be very persuasive for a judge. So Molly claimed that she was worried that Jason was monitoring her phone and was checking her text messages. So Molly and this woman, Melissa Sam, set up a system of code words, if you like, where Molly would send her these audio recordings, and she would describe them as being audiobook recommendations. So she sent, I think in the end, it was 6 recordings that Molly sent to Melissa Sams, but only 2 of the recordings actually opened up. The others didn't work, they were distorted. And in court in 2023, when Tom and Molly Martens accepted the plea deal and were being sentenced for voluntary manslaughter, they drew out the sentencing hearing over a period of 8 days. Now, I spoke to detectives and legal experts and journalists in North Carolina, and they said that the standard sentencing proceedings for voluntary manslaughter would normally take a maximum of half an hour. Here they had 8 days of hearing because the Martens wanted to establish, even though they were pleading guilty to the lesser charge, they were trying to get off without spending another day in prison. So they were trying to establish that there were extraordinary mitigating circumstances, one of which was that, there had been this domestic abuse in the house and there were these recordings. But in actual fact, only one of the recordings was played in court, and that showed Jason and Molly and Jack and Sarah around the living room table having dinner in the evening, and they are having a big argument. There are voices raised and Jason slams a chair, but there is no violence. Jason doesn't hit her or push her or anything like that. The worst of it is that he raises his voice and he slams this kitchen chair on the floor. So that was the extent of what Molly could produce as evidence of domestic violence, despite having been recording in the house for, detectives estimate, at least 7 months prior to the killing. They estimated that there were 150 hours of secret recordings in that time, yet the detectives and the district attorney were only given these 2 tapes, only one of which was of any evidential value, and even then it only showed Jason losing his temper and raising his voice, but not actually being physically violent in any way.
Do you think they are both guilty then, Brian, personally?
I don't think that's for me to say, and the book is written in a very objective way. It's not a one-sided story from Jason's family. It's places all the evidence on the record and lets the reader make up their own minds. But what I will say is that the sheriff, who is the most senior law enforcement officer in Davidson County, and Lieutenant Wanda Thompson, who was the head of the Criminal Investigations Division, they both told me that they believed the Martens allowed Jason to die before they called 911, that they believed it delayed by as much as an hour. The 911 operator, a woman called Karen Capps, she told the court that she believed they were faking CPR. Any of the first emergency responders on the scene all felt that, the body was cold, the blood was congealed. There were serious question marks over whether they were actually called immediately after this happened. And then the detectives, all of the search warrants that they issued, the detectives had to provide supporting affidavits. And in those supporting affidavits, they all say that they do not believe the story as told by Tom and Molly Martens on the night. It didn't match the scene, and they believe that certain parts of their statements were fabricated, and that Molly, in tandem with that, was also spreading accusations throughout the neighbourhood about Jason being a domestic abuser. But when they came to actually investigate what these 5 female confidants of Molly had actually seen, not one of them had actually personally witnessed any physical violence. All of these 5 women had a single source, and that single source was Molly. So the overriding perspective of the detectives and the prosecutors involved is that Molly wanted to adopt the children. The children were both victims of this and the motive. Molly was desperate to become a mother. She could not have children herself, but Jason would not, despite marrying her and being married to Jason for 4 years, Jason would not allow her to adopt the children. So they believe, the detectives and the prosecutors believe that was what motivated all of this. They think that Molly summoned her parents there that night. And remember, they travelled 4 3/4 hours from Tennessee to North Carolina, and what they said was an impromptu, spontaneous visit. But the phone records showed a flurry of calls between Molly and her mom, Molly and her dad on that day. There were 11 calls between Molly and Sharon on the journey alone from Knoxville, Tennessee to North Carolina. So the overriding sense from the detectives I spoke to is that they believe Molly was frustrated by Jason not allowing her to adopt the kids. And she, on the back of what Melissa Sams had advised her, that she could get this emergency custody order, provided she had these secret recordings that would help her in court. On the back of that, say, seed that Sams might have inadvertently planted in Molly's mind, Molly set about engineering a situation in the house where she would summon her father to be there, because as an ex-FBI agent, he would be a very good witness to have.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, Brian, but I'm sadly running out of time. I could speak to you all day about this subject, but I will tell our listeners afterwards that we're going to be doing a true crime programme soon, and we're going to be concentrating on this case. So I really appreciate you joining us. The book, A Deadlier Marriage by Brian Carroll, is published by Sandy Cove and is available online and in stores from the 21st of August, so only a few days' time. And it's also being sold on our website, tre.radio. Brian, if people want to find out even more, do you have a website as well?
www.briancarroll.info.
Oh, it's been great to chat to you. I can't wait till the book comes out, and I will be sure to download it onto my Kindle.
Thank you very much, Sue.
Thanks, Brian. Bye-bye.